Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Seth, one of the co-hosts of Engaged Podcast, to bring you today another great episode of Engaged Podcast. But before I can get into today's episode and who our guest is, I have to first tell you about my world-famous announcements. If you're listening to this podcast for the very first time and you haven't done this already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button wherever you're hearing my voice right now. So if you're listening on Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, anywhere you can get podcasts and you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button. That way, every Thursday when we come out with a new episode, it's going to be directly downloaded onto your phone. You won't have to look for us. You won't have to search for us. It's going to be there waiting for you. It's super simple and super easy. And who doesn't like super simple and super easy? I do. I know you do. So boom, done. Also, if you haven't had a chance yet, go ahead and go over to our YouTube page. Our YouTube page links down in the show notes, and there you can find all kinds of amazing content. You can find book review videos, videos on leadership. We have our live stream services every Sunday at 11 a.m. We have our music review videos where me and Pastor Anthony sit down and we listen to music and we give our honest reaction and we give our review of those songs and we look to see if there's any biblical twists to those songs. It's a great and wonderful time. It's been a huge hit. We've been going through the pretty much the catalog of the band U2, and just the amount of feedback we've gotten. I mean, I'm telling you, like something like 50 or 60 subscribers on this channel alone are just from those videos. So it's a huge blast that we have doing those, and a lot of people seem to enjoy it. So it's pretty awesome. That's there for you. We also have every single Thursday this podcast, but in a different format. So if you're someone who you like to physically see the episode, you want to feel like you're in the room with us, then guess what? Look no further than going to our YouTube page, our YouTube channel. There we have today's podcast in visual format. So you get to feel like you're actually in the room with us. We do this every single week. It's a lot of fun. And so if you want to listen to the podcast that way, then go to our YouTube page and you can find it there. So that being said, let's get to who our guest is today. Our guest today is a longtime friend of mine. Her name is Jennifer De La Cruz. So I've known her since I was 12 years old. My dad and her dad used to go to the same seminary together in St. Louis, Missouri. They were classmates. And like I said, I've known Jen for so many years. I'm not going to try to do the math on that. I went to public school, so I don't do math no good. But yeah, when we were thinking of different people to have on the show, Jen was one of the first people that I thought of because not only is she extremely smart, but she knows a lot about the Bible, and specifically, which is why she's on the podcast today, she knows a lot about apologetics. Now, if you don't know what apologetics is, that's great because Jen's going to tell you about it today. But it is a very big topic when you're talking about the church and Christian culture. It was one of the things that made me stronger in my faith, but sadly, it's kind of a forgotten thing within most modern churches today, which is, it's awesome that someone like Jen is not only passionate about apologetics, but she's very good at being an apologist. So give it up for our friend Jennifer De La Cruz. Ready? 3, 2, 1, go.
All right, here we go. This is Pastor Anthony here at Faith Presbyterian Church. We welcome you to Engage Podcast. Here I am sitting with my sidekick, Seth. How are you, Seth, today?
Fantastic.
All right. You feeling okay?
Yeah, I'm all right.
You good?
Yeah, I'm all right.
All right. He asked me that question like 8 to 10 times in the last hour. That's why I'm throwing that at him. Kind of an odd situation going on here.
Yeah.
We can't let the audience in on that. But today we have a very special guest. This is Jennifer De La Cruz.
Yes.
Very nice. Now, why don't you do us a quick favor and tell us a little bit about how you know Seth, so how we got this whole thing hooked up.
Yeah, sure. So we're both PKs, so pastors' kids. And so I was originally born in Venezuela. That's where my dad went down there for 17 years, and he planted a church out there. So technically I'm also an MK, a missionary kid. And so then things were getting pretty bad politically in Venezuela. And so they had everyone kind of come back to St. Louis, or, wherever they were from originally in the country. And so we came to St. Louis to, my dad was going to finish up his doctorate. And so we were there for about 4 years, and that's where I met Seth, was kind of on campus of Concordia kind of seminary. So yeah, we were just like playing like Frisbee and whatnot.
Do you remember the first nickname you ever gave me?
Oh my goodness. No, I don't.
It was,
can you actually say it on this podcast?
Yeah.
Or not?
Yeah, it's something that's still true about me to this day. So the first year I lived in St. Louis on SEM, because we would walk to school, right? Because White Down was just right down the street. Yeah. And I didn't know anybody just yet. I knew like Annie McCluskey and then Robbie, and that was pretty much it. But it was a Rams hoodie. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
And so Jen and all of her friends would walk behind me. And because I was just a loner, right, looking like Ted Kaczynski, they would just make fun of my hoodie, and they called me Ramsey.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we totally did.
And then it was like that following summer, we just started hanging out. And I think it was, I don't know, maybe a year later, Jen goes, we used to make fun of you like hardcore for when you walk to school because of your Rams hoodie. But
yeah,
that was an endearing story. It was. That showed you really loved him from the beginning.
It was friendship. Boom, right there.
That's how all great friendships start, is by making fun of people.
Exactly.
You made fun of
Go ahead.
You made fun of me for my the first time I met you. I was wearing a Celtics jersey.
Oh.
And I walked up to you and you just literally went, "Why?" And I went, "What?" And you went, "Why?" And you're like, "Do you not realize you're living in Western PA?" So
there we go. So you and I already share something.
There's a pattern here.
There's a pattern. Everyone that meets Seth always makes fun of him.
Poor thing. I'd hope not.
So Jen, where are you living now?
In California right now.
Okay. So, and how long have you been there?
So I moved out here, or just came out here for school. So I did my undergrad at Concordia Irvine, and then did my master's at Biola University. And then during my time at Biola, I met my husband, and so then I ended up staying out here. So yeah.
And so what were your majors in? Were they, I know you have a background in apologetics, but was that a major of yours?
Yeah. So for undergrad, I did graduated with theology and a minor in missiology. And then at Biola, it was Christian Apologetics.
Wow. Okay. So tell us, let's pretend that the audience has no idea about apologetics, because they're gonna hear that word and they're gonna think that they have a skin rash. Tell everybody, just basically, let's start from the bottom. What is apologetics? What does it mean? Where is its basis in the scriptures?
Oh yeah, for sure. So apologetics, put simply, is giving evidence or reason for Christianity and faith. And it's also answering objections to Christianity. So an apologist then is someone who doesn't apologize for their faith, but someone who gives a defense for the faith. So it's really a great tool we can use in our conversations to just like get people to think and challenge people to give reasons for what they believe, but then also kind of pointing the way to these are the reasons for why we believe what we believe. And I think just like kind of the almost go-to verse that is just very, just says it very well, is in 1 Peter 3:15. That says, "Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give a reason for the hope that you have in you, but we're to do this with gentleness and respect. And that is so important there, because that's like the goal here. It's not to get in arguments with people, or it's a defense, but it's not to be defensive with one another. It's really answering challenges genuinely, and really giving people solid answers, not trying to get in an argument here.
So the verse here, I knew you were going to go to that. I already had a bookmark here. The beginning of that verse is sanctify Christ as Lord in your heart.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that important for the apologist?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's like first and foremost what you got to do, because it's not about winning an intellectual argument, or bullying people intellectually, or just trying to I don't know, use your intellect or your knowledge to make other people feel bad about themselves. It's really about, you have this relationship with Christ, and he is first and foremost in your life. And because you are so grateful and you are so full of that love and that relationship with him, that's when you can turn to other people and say, hey, I want to share this with you. And a really great way to share that with you is using your brain. I mean, Jesus says, worship the, Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and in your mind. And so it's like, that's one way we can worship him, is by understanding him in that way, and then also sharing that with other people.
I think that's really cool. So, and later in the verse, you mentioned it talks about gentleness and reverence.
Mm-hmm.
Why are those two things important? What is that all about?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important to, just in general, to treat people well, but also when you're trying to persuade someone of something, when they get upset, they stop listening. It's over. You've kind of lost in that sense. But when you come off as genuine and respectful, and you genuinely do want to understand the other person's point of view and what they think on certain things, and how maybe you can maybe either correct part of their thinking, or you can give them something else to think about. That's all part of a friendly conversation. Like I said, we're not here. An apologist isn't a person trying to, be rude to people, or have, just make other people feel bad about things. We're trying to respect people and have really great conversations with other people that gets them to think without making them feel bad about whatever it is that they believe.
Now, I'm assuming that through your education and just life experiences, you've had experienced having these kinds of conversations with people.
Yeah.
Can you share with us maybe where one went wrong and where one went right?
Yeah, sure. I'll start with a wrong one, because that one just
Those are daily. Those are daily. They're daily.
Yeah, we're not daily, but
the easy ones are when we screwed up. The hard ones are when we got it right.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, yeah. This was in my undergrad. I would take people out. I was part of kind of the ministry program in my undergrad, and once a week I would take people out to UCI, which is kind of the neighboring. It's a public school, so it's not, affiliated with any religion or anything, but they have this kind of walkway where it's for open ideas or whatever. So we would set up a table and just say free coffee, and just invite people to come over. And, they're always like, what's the catch? But we're like, no, really, you can literally just take your coffee and leave. But if you're interested in having a conversation, we're game, And so that was a really great venue to really dip my feet in having a lot of different conversations with a lot of different people. And just one time I remember it, there were 3 gentlemen that came up, and they were older, and we got in this conversation, and it was about babies, and whether or not, if a baby, passes away before they're baptized, where, does it go to hell, or does it go to heaven, or what happens? And I just remember just feeling very oppressed because they're very emotional about the topic. And so that was really coming off onto me. And so I was feeling very like cornered, and I was just like, I don't know. And it was just like a horrible interaction because I just felt like they were upset, I was upset, and nothing fruitful like came from that. It was just like all around negativity. But what I really learned from that, because there's always learning in any kind of interaction you have with people, was that I just really need to take my time and just like calm down, because sometimes their questions may actually be well-intentioned, but the way they're delivering it is so emotional that you kind of get caught up in the emotions, and then it's just a negative experience. But if you're really able to like overcome that, and you're able to stay calm, which is really hard to do, especially when people are not fighting fair, or not listening to you, or they're making assumptions, or they're cutting you off. It's really hard to stay calm and, stay gracious with people. But I think that's really important to do. And that's definitely like a big lesson that I learned in that interaction. Could have gone so much better if I would have just asked really better questions, gotten to know their point of view a little more, try to like de-escalate the situation before we got into like the heat of things. So yeah, that's an example of kind of the bad way, but kind of a more fruitful conversation. I actually had to do a project one time for one of my classes on Buddhism, or actually, sorry, it was, you could choose any religion, but you just had to interview someone that was like prominent in their specific religion, whether it was like a priest or a whatever. And so I went to a Buddhist monk, I believe they're called, and he was actually raised a Christian, and but now he's a Buddhist, and now he's a leader in the Buddhist faith. And we were just able to have a really friendly conversation, and I was able to feel like even point out some of his inconsistencies and some of his thinking. Like he would contradict some of the things that he was saying, or he would be like thinking of God this way, then he would be thinking of God a different way. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. You say that. How does that, match with what you said earlier? Can you explain that to me? So just asking questions of like, really, how does their whole picture make sense and fit with reality? That's a really good tool to use, is just questions.
How important is worldview?
Can you dive into that a little more? Like worldview in general?
Yeah, just somebody's worldview and outlook on life and having these conversations.
Oh yeah, I mean, it dictates everything you do and everything you say. What people do what they really believe. If you say you're a Christian, but you're like, I kind of want to do my own thing. I kind of want to be my own God and just like kind of do whatever. Well, then you're going to do like, if you really aren't convinced that Christianity is true, and you're kind of like wishy-washy about it, and you kind of want to do more your own thing, then you're kind of going to follow that. Whatever it is that you believe, that's what you're going to prioritize, and that's how you're going to live your life. If you really believe that, animals are more important than people because they, don't sin, since they aren't, they don't do anything wrong or anything bad, even though I would call that amoral, you know, they're not neither good nor bad, but some people would say, oh, that makes them superior to us. Well, then you're going to, you know, create foundations that, you know, support animals, and you're going to, you know, push that all life is great, but then not necessarily, you know, the unborn is not necessarily under that category, you know, like abortion should be a choice, but then animals, like, we have to protect them at all costs. So yeah, I really do think that what you believe about the world drives your life and your decisions and the way you treat people and talk to people.
Remember when we studied apologetics, we talked about neutrality. Did you guys study neutrality at all? Human neutrality?
Can you go into that a little more?
One of the assumptions that people have is that humans are neutral, and that you're able to talk to them from a place of neutrality. But, you know, we looked at the biblical picture of man, and one of the things that we came up with, and I agree with, is that man is not neutral. Man has a slant or a starting point already, so you can approach them from a place where they're not blank slate. They're already slanted towards a certain perspective. It would be like a scientist that comes up with a conclusion. Well, he comes up with that conclusion because his starting point is already a certain place. So he's going to find everything to come up to drive him into a certain place. And with man, we say there's no neutrality because man is born in sin. And so one of the things I keep hearing you saying is about arguing. Do you think that you can argue somebody into the kingdom?
I'm glad you brought this up, because if you guys weren't going to bring it up, I was going to bring it up, because I do think that this is a, I guess, slogan you can say that people use against apologetics or against using, you know, your reasoning for your beliefs. Like, I've also heard, you know, you blind faith is stronger because you're, you know, putting more trust in or whatever, instead of like finding the facts or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I agree in the sense that you can't argue into the kingdom anyone into the kingdom, in the sense that there's nothing you or I can specifically do to guarantee someone's salvation. You can't love someone into the kingdom. You can't argue someone into the kingdom. And that's because salvation is the Lord's. Salvation isn't up to us. We don't have that power to be like, boom, you're saved, you know? And the beautiful thing though about God is that he wants to use us in reaching other people. And so even though, no, you can't by yourself argue or reason someone into the kingdom or love someone into the kingdom, with the Holy Spirit, I mean, anything is possible. I mean, both reason and love are attributes of his character, and both of them are very God-honoring ways of that he can use us to bring someone into the kingdom. So yeah, it's definitely not us. It has nothing to do, you know, with our work. Jesus does, you know, all the heavy lifting, which, praise God, because that really frees us up, because when we mess up, then it's like, okay, well, their salvation is not dependent on me. You know, it's dependent on the Holy Spirit. But even when you mess up, God can still use those interactions. And he can use logic and reasoning, and he can also use an act of kindness and an act of love. He can use all those things to bring people into the kingdom.
Well, one of the things that I've always understood about when it comes to apologetics is that kind of like how Paul in Romans 1, like one of the commentaries by F.F. Bruce, he talked about the core point of Romans 1 is Paul proving or showing that people's perception of God and Christianity is not based upon intellectual reasons. It's actually built upon moral reasons, which in a modern day it's easier for someone to believe in and like look to science as a God rather than looking to the God of the Bible, because the gods of science doesn't require you to change your life at all, but following God of the Bible does. So it's not an intellectual, it's a moral. So like the point of apologetics is you're getting that person from, again, not really necessarily through arguing, but asking questions and kind of just opening them up to their own assumptions, is that their reason for seeing Christianity in a certain light is not based upon whether or not you can prove God's existence. It's built upon the fact of, are you willing to change your life if in fact God is real? Which that's the bigger question.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I mean, I do think there are some intellectual roadblocks. Like I do hear a lot, people really struggle with the problem of evil. And that's a situation in which we would be answering, objections for Christianity, which is beautiful because evil can actually be approved for God. But, I think some of it, I totally think you're right. It is a moral thing, and people do want to follow their own impulses. They want to be their own God, and God really gets in the way of that, and you want to live your own way. So they suppress the truth, even though they know it's plain to them that, God is real. But I do think that the value in apologetics comes in when those roadblocks are there, and they're like, for those people that are questioning and are like, well, maybe, but this, or but that, or, maybe it's someone who's disappointed them or whatever. And apologetics can really help in either clearing those roadblocks or pointing out inconsistencies in their thinking, or in, a lot of times people just recite slogans or recite really popular phrases, and then they say, well,
Facebook posts. Those drive me nuts. But yeah.
And you're like, no.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can really help with like pointing that out and be like, oh, like, what do you mean by that? Or how does that, what are the reasons for your belief in that? And they're like, well, I've never had to give a reason for, believing that before. You Christians are the ones that need reasons. And it's like, yeah, we do, but so do you. Like, if you're going to have a belief in something, you need to back it up with reasons and evidence. And if you're just believing whatever you're believing just because you want to believe it, because you don't want God to exist, then that's a really bad argument.
Yeah.
And then you really are just suppressing the truth.
So connecting back into Romans 1 with the suppression of the truth, have you ever studied transcendental apologetics? With you ever read anything by Cornelius Van Til or Greg Bahnsen?
Like objective truth? Is that what you're referring to? No.
Transcendental apologetics with Cornelius Van Til or Greg Bahnsen?
No. What, can you enlighten me on
That's
it?
because she didn't go to seminary in the 90s.
Well, this would be seminary back when Paul wrote Romans.
Oh, Paul wrote Romans? Yeah. Okay, all right. Yeah.
Well, enlighten us on it.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now I'm curious.
Sure. Transcendental apologetics. That ties into Romans chapter 1. When Paul, you're referring to Paul's talking about suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. And transcendental apologetics is that talking about how there is a truth, an alien truth that speaks to us outside of ourselves, and that would be the God of the Bible. That we need this truth in our lives to change us, because left alone, we are our own gods. And you were referring to that earlier. How man wants to be their own God. And so we need a transcendental, something outside of ourselves to come in and change our lives, which is the God of Scripture. And I'll never forget when my professor was teaching on Romans 1, he talked about the verse that we've been talking about, that mankind, the knowledge of God is known to everybody, so they are without excuse. And man suppresses that truth and unrighteousness. And the illustration that he gave was when we are in a swimming pool and we take a basketball or a beach ball, whatever, volleyball, and we're pushing it down. And he said that ball is doing everything it can to push itself back up above the water, but you are putting all your energy on it to keep it down. And that's the word picture of man, what man does with God. They suppress the truth. And so in the frontal lobe, we will walk around and claim that there is no God, but the rest of our brain betrays us, because we, even though we may say that, we walk out of our house and we live like there is a God. So the inconsistencies that we're talking about, I don't think the unbeliever even understands that if they were going to be truly consistent with their worldview, then the Darwinian evolutionary worldview would cause them to root for the bully. That it would cause them to see the kid who's in school with a cast, and instead of opening the door for them, they would actually trip them down the stairs, because for all that they care, they want to get a head start and an upper one up on that person. And I know that may sound weird, not for us three, but for somebody listening. Why that sounds crazy is because nobody realizes that they're inconsistent. That only the believer is the person that could truly say, I'm going to care for my neighbor. And every time the unbeliever does that, they're literally borrowing from our worldview. Because nobody goes out and runs a 5K on a Saturday unless they're borrowing from my worldview. Because my worldview says to love God and love my neighbor as myself. So why would an unbeliever go out and wake up early on Saturday, sacrifice their own self for somebody else? It doesn't make sense. But the fact is they don't even think of this.
Well, the thing that, at least for me, like the talking about the transcendental worldview, that what were the two professors who taught you this?
Well, that's not the professor. These are the authors that are the leading authors: Greg Bahnsen and Cornelius Van Til.
I'll put those down in the comments for people if they want to do some deep diving on that. But to that point, though, like I always think of it this way. So, when people have the belief that man is the creator of our own morality, that we are in charge of our own morality, that, well, it's like, at least how I picture it, maybe it's because I'm a dad, I don't know, but like I think of it this way: if I invited someone to come watch my kids, I'm going to tell the babysitter the rules I have over the house. The only people who have the option to break those rules is myself. The babysitter doesn't have that right. The kids don't have that right. Why? Because I'm the parent. I'm the rule creator. Therefore, I get the ability to change and make exceptions or whatever. If you just think about it plainly, if mankind is the creator of the moral law, then mankind then has the ability to change it and alter it to for whatever purpose we think is justified. So again, taking that belief to the fullest level is you look at someone like Adolf Hitler, and what he did was not really that bad, because he was just changing the moral law to benefit Germany. But we all know that what he did was not right, and it's because we all believe that there is a law above the law of the land. That there is a law, that there is a law creator that oversees us, that we are accountable to.
Oh yeah. No, if we are the creators of morality, then everything just gets reduced to your own opinion. Because if you think what Hitler did was wrong, well, that's your opinion. And his opinion, he was doing what was good for the country. And so, yeah, absolutely. We need something transcendent outside of us, and not just for truth, but for morality as well, for sure.
So with this being said, do you think that apologetics and evangelism are the same thing, or do you think that they're two different things that just share a commonality?
There's similarities and differences there. Apologetics, kind of like we said, is more about the defense of the faith, and evangelism is more about sharing, whether it's your testimony or the story of the gospel, like what Jesus has done to other people. And so they're the same in that the goal is the same, right? It's to get people to, or just pointing the way towards the cross and being like, hey, whether it's using a story or it's using reasoning, it's saying, this is the truth, this is the way. But they're different in that apologetics is more narrowly, like the driver of the conversation is more reason and logic, versus evangelism is more a story, whether it's personal or the story of the Bible. So in this sense, I do think that apologetics is a little more versatile in that, well, you can also use them together. You know, you can share your personal story and then you can share reasons for your belief. And I think that's like the best combo. But apologetics is really useful, not just in a one-on-one conversation, but it can also be used in like a debate room and in like, you know, just a lot of different circles, especially nowadays, since, you know, Christians are very much so categorized as unintellectuals and just not with it, you know, against science. And that's certainly not the case. And so apologetics can really help show why that's not the case. And it's just a lot more useful in a lot of different conversations, not trying to take away from, obviously the gospel is extremely important and very powerful. But in our day and age, I feel like logic and reasoning kind of resonates a lot more, kind of like with our generation. So I feel like it's a very useful tool to have.
Go ahead.
So if you were going to sit down and coach somebody or a group of people on the do's and don'ts of apologetics, you know, what would they be? What would you say if you were able to mentor, you know, a group of people, young people? What would you say are the top do this and don't do that kind of thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, big on the do's is be very gracious, ask a lot of questions. Questions can be so powerful because not only can you use questions to really understand someone and understand their point of view, because a lot of times we assume we know what people believe, or we assume what they're about to say. But someone may be, you know, Buddhist, Mormon, atheist, whatever, but they may not necessarily adhere to all the, you know, beliefs of their religion or non-religion. You know, like an atheist can be a lot of different, you know, an atheist for a lot of different reasons. And so really understanding their story and their point of view and why they believe what they believe is really important. Because that really kind of dictates where you take the conversation, whether it's someone who, you know, rejected Christianity because they, you know, their parent was a Christian and they're a really bad parent. And they're like, well, if that's, you know, if my father's supposed to be like the father, then I don't know about that. Or, you know, they had a really bad experience, or maybe it was a college professor, you know, told them that you're stupid if you're a Christian, so you gotta not be a Christian, you know. So there's a lot of different reasons why people believe what they believe. And so it's really important to understand their point of view. But what you can also accomplish with the question is kind of making a point, because sometimes when you try to tell people, well, no, this is what you should believe, that kind of like puts them off. But if you ask them, oh, well, can you help me understand? I feel like this point that you just made, it doesn't really line up with what you said earlier. Can you like walk me through that? Like, how does this and this, how do they correlate together? And so then they have to tell you how their belief makes sense. And if it doesn't, they're like, wait, maybe my belief doesn't make sense, instead of you telling them, hey, your belief doesn't make sense. You know, yeah. It's like a lot more of an effective tool.
Are you a reader?
Yeah. Well, although lately I drive a lot, so I'll just do Audible. Audible's great.
Check out, I mentioned him earlier, Greg Bahnsen.
Yeah.
He wrote a book called Every Thought Captive.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I really like.
I'll write that down too.
And the other guy, Cornelius Van Til, it's called Van Tilian, really, Apologetics, but his book is like gigantic, mega. Smart words.
I was gonna say that would have to be an Audible one then.
So,
some of those are like tough to like read through. I'm like falling asleep.
yeah.
What was the name of the first one? If you can repeat it.
Greg Bahnsen is the author, and it's called Every Thought Captive.
So while we're on this subject of books, if you had to recommend one book or one resource to people, so that the average Christian could get a good feel for what apologetics is and how they can defend their faith and all that, what would be that resource? What would be that book that you would recommend?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's a lot of really, really good resources out there and a lot of really good, clear books on apologetics. But if I have to pick one, I would really go with Tactics by Greg Koukl. It's not only a really easy read, like it's a short book, very user-friendly, but it is just like very empowering for the Christian because it's very, very practical. Like you can literally read a couple of chapters and then turn around the next day and like implement it into conversations you have with people. And so it's a really great book, not just to get a kind of very, very general overview of apologetics, but more than that, it really facilitates people, or it enables people to facilitate these difficult conversations. Because a lot of times these conversations are very uncomfortable for people to have, and they don't have them because they're scared to have them. And so a book like Tactics is so good for any Christian because you don't need to have a master's in apologetics. You really don't need to have too much learning on the subject. You just need to be a Christian who wants to share, God with people in a more effective way. And he really capitalizes on the value of questions. And it's just a really, really fantastic book. It's really short, so it's like anyone can read it, and it's very, very practical.
Cool. So in your career, your ministry, your overall life, who are some of the biggest influences that have made you the person that you are? And also, who are those people that have helped you to bring your faith to the level that it is at now?
Yeah. I mean, I for sure, of course, have to give a shout out to my dad. I mean, he's just not only a very smart person, but he's a very gentle person. And I've just had the privilege of seeing him not only preach, but also teach different classes. And he just has a really eloquent way of speaking and relating to people. And I just love how just accessible he makes the material. He's really able to, like, he's smart, but like he really dumbs down the material for you so like anyone can digest it. And that's just something that I really aspire to, because I'm like, I don't want to be confusing to people. I want to be able to say something and people understand it and not like, confuse them. So yeah, that's just definitely someone I really look up to, and someone that has always been, very supportive. And just got to give a shout out to my dad. But also I've had a lot of really great professors at Biola. Also at Concordia, but really in studying apologetics, I had a really, really good experience. And I would have to say that Kevin Lewis was one of my professors there. And he actually also works in the law field. And so he's very familiar with evidence and who counts as a witness and proving something beyond a reasonable doubt. And so we were really able to kind of put Christianity on trial and put God on trial and say, does this add up? Like, beyond a reasonable doubt, does God exist? Is Christianity true? And it's just like so cool, because it's like, yes, it is. And yes, he is real. And it's just very cool to be able to worship God with our minds in that way and in the classroom. And he's just someone I really look up to, and just being able to help me really put those two together and just strengthen my faith in that sense. And then someone else, which I've never met this person personally, but I've seen him speak twice, and I've read his book, Cold Case Christianity, and it's Warner Wallace. Love him. That's another book I would highly recommend. That one's a little meatier, like you would have to read it several times to really get the content. And but I mean, it's still like an easy read in that it's accessible to people, but it's just, there's a lot of information, so it's a lot to take in. But yeah, he is just someone who's an eloquent speaker, and he's a homicide detective who became a Christian because he did the same thing what we did in our class. He put, God on trial and really said, okay, if Christianity were a cold case, how does it hold up? How are we gonna, let's investigate the evidence. How does, could it really be true from the evidence that we have available to us? And it is. And so he's just someone that I really look up to.
Okay.
And
yeah, I'm right. I'm good. Sorry.
Are you good?
Sorry.
But yeah, all these people, they really, in their teaching, in their, how they are, they really, they're just people I look up to in general and would want to emulate, but also through what they taught, it really strengthened my faith, because really there comes a point in your life when your faith becomes your own. Like I grew up a Christian and I was always a Christian in that sense, but there comes a day when it's like, okay, are you a Christian because you grew up a Christian, or are you a Christian because you believe like you're a Christian? And apologetics really solidified that for me, and especially from like what I learned. And so, yeah, it's been an incredible journey, and I just highly recommend people to, just dip their toes in the apologetics realm. You don't have to do it for a career or for anything, but it's just a great, great tool to have.
Yeah. Well, so while we're on the subject of like mentors, first and foremost, the man sitting next to me is one of my best and greatest mentors. I've known you for 10 years.
Hey.
How about that? Surprises. Every day there's surprises.
Always. Well, you are coming up on 5 years here at church, so I got to give you some sort of boost. Yeah.
Jen, text him later and say he likes gift cards.
Perfect. I
will. But one of my, like the guy that got me into apologetics, and it was kind of just a huge moment for me, was a man by the name of, and you might know him, Ravi Zacharias. Mm-hmm. Read his books. I listened to, we're talking probably hundreds of his videos on YouTube. I saw him speak twice live, and really was fed by him. And as a lot of people know from the news, there were sexual allegations that were brought against him. Come to find out they were true, and a bunch of other very just horrible stuff came out about him that was all in fact true. Yeah. And I was gutted by the whole thing because, again, like Ravi was the guy who helped me, even though I never met the guy personally. He was a huge influence on my faith, on just who I am as a person. And you and I had spoke previously about this particular topic, and I liked what you had to say a lot. What is the single greatest lesson that we as Christians can learn through this whole Ravi Zacharias situation?
Yeah. Well, first, before I answer your question, I just want to say situations like these just like really just grieve my heart.
Yeah.
Because it just doesn't make sense to me. How can someone who is so not just a Christian, but like a leader in the church, and like someone who just really speaks the gospel so well and has led so many people to Christ, and like just appears to have such a heart for people. Like, it just doesn't make sense in my mind, and it really, really makes me sad, and it makes me upset, because then people always point to those situations and say, well, if this is what your Christian leadership looks like, I don't want to be a Christian. And I don't blame them, you know? I mean, it's very frustrating. And that's not to say, of course, that we don't sin, or,
Right.
you know, we don't mess up, or we don't do stupid things, or, you know, none of that. But really, as a Christian, you want to, you know, reflect Christ, and you want to do your best not to earn salvation, but so that other people can see how attractive, you know, Christ is, and how much he loves people, and how much we should love one another. And then to see such a big person, you know, he was just a very big name. So many people knew about him. To do stuff like that, I'm just like, I don't get it, you know? And so thankfully, that's not for me to judge. That's for God to know. But those situations just deeply, deeply grieve me. But to answer your question, there were a lot of things, a lot of books, a lot of videos, like you said, that were so good and so helpful and full of truth. So, you know, truth spoken from a broken and just bad vessel is still truth. And so, to, you know, as the saying goes, I don't think we have to throw out the baby with the bathwater, in the sense that we can still use what he's written, what he's said, the good things that he's done, in order to help teach people, help reach people, help learn ourselves. It's just so unfortunate, because it just like really puts a taint on the whole thing, you know? So like before, where I'd be like, oh yeah, just watch a Ravi Zacharias video. You know, now I wouldn't say that, you know? Or it's like, here's his book. You know, I wouldn't say that.
I was preaching like, what, a month ago? I used one of his quotes, and I've used this before, and it's just so good.
Yeah.
And before I would introduce it, he's the only one that caught it. He actually called me out. And before it was like, and by the great Ravi Zacharias, and from the book, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And this time I was like, and from one Christian author. I was like, I am not bringing up that guy's name.
And as soon as he started the quote, my eyes were like, this big. Yeah. I was like, no, he's not. From
a very vaguely.
Oh my goodness, some dude.
Yeah, a vague Christian apologist from India.
Oh, that's so funny.
I agree with your points. I mean, for all of sin and fallen short of the glory of God, but there's a difference between sinning and living in habitual, blatant, unrepentant sin. And I think that's the thing that shocks all of us.
Yeah.
So the unbelieving world is going to wait for anything, especially the higher you get in the Christian world. Like, oh, look, you messed up. But when it's obvious, unrepentant, perpetual, we're all sitting around scratching our heads like, what the heck is that?
At least to me, one of the things I just recently, because I had this question in my head just throughout the whole week, and one of the things I kind of like, I've asked myself this about other Christians who have committed crimes, or is, like, do we as Christians need to stop making people like this celebrities? Because but like my mom and dad have always said about Hollywood, is that the biggest problem with celebrities is that human beings are not built to have a God complex, and especially when you take a human, you infect them with sin, right? We already see ourselves as a God most of the time. And then when you become a celebrity and people look at you like you're a deity, it just goes right to your head, and you could really screw up your life. As Christians, I just feel like maybe we need to take this as an opportunity and just simply say the fact that, like, in a way of how this like Ravi Zacharias situation doesn't happen again is that we don't take a certain person and make them into something more than they are, which is they're just an average everyday Christian who's just devout in their faith. And, you know, I just, but then again, though, when someone is as good as he was,
right.
right.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say is that I think it comes from a good place of like, this person is really good at like this thing, or they're really good at helping people understand something, or, you know, like, let's share their works more so that more people can, you know, come to faith. And it's like, comes from a good place. But yeah, no, I totally agree with you. People just, we're not meant to be God. And when people are treated like, you know, a God, then it just, none of it turns out good for anyone.
See, this isn't a lesson for the crowd. This is a lesson for the person.
For the individual.
Because human nature is going to always take somebody and put them on a pedestal. It's who we are. The lesson is the character and integrity that you yourself have to have. And, you know, Abraham Lincoln, he said, if you want to test a man's character, don't give them money, give them power. And that's just what happens. So I think that's an interesting just conversation in general. Question. So we got to be mindful of time. Would you be willing to do a part 2 follow up in the future?
Sure. Yeah, definitely.
And so you mentioned your father. He sounds like the kind of guy we'd like to have on our show. Would you put in a good word for us? Would he be willing to do something like this?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'll put in a good word.
Put in a good word. I mean, don't mention Seth too much. You might not want to do it.
He'll be like, oh no, that kid.
He'll say, is he still wearing that Rams jersey?
Yeah.
No, I could just see it. She just says, hey, you want to do a podcast? He's like, sure. Who's the person? They say, Faith Presbyterian Church in Hermitage, Pennsylvania. And he's like, oh, that's so cool. It's Pennsylvania. It's across the country. And do I know these people? Like, well, you don't know the pastor, but you do know the youth guy who does the podcast with them. I'm like, oh yeah, who's that? And she'd be like, you remember Seth from Sam? He's like, yeah, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it.
I'm out.
Just let that be a surprise, okay?
Okay. He shows up. Oh, hey.
Yeah, all of a sudden the screen goes blank.
Like the whole time I could just see him like just looking at me like, I know you from somewhere.
You're very familiar.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I didn't know if we had any more. Or...
Well, I just say okay. So let's do rapid fire questions, like a minute to each question. Okay. So if you had the opportunity to say one thing to all the churches in America, what would you say?
I would say that really don't be afraid of people's questions or their arguments against Christianity, because sometimes really people shy away from these conversations because they're afraid that, oh no, maybe I don't have the truth and someone's going to say something I don't know the answer to. It's okay if you don't have the answer, because you can just say, you know what, I don't know that. Let's, get back together some other time and, I'll have an answer for you then. And if it's a stranger, well, then you'll thank them for their time and then you'll know for the next time. But really, like, if Christianity really is the truth, then we shouldn't be afraid of people's questions.
Well, it's also a way people get to actually grow in their faith too.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Someone, let's say an atheist, asks a question you don't know. Next thing you know, you go home and you Google it, you do your research, and then guess what? Boom, you just learned something that you normally would never have thought about.
Yeah.
And then that also prepares you for the next person that you see.
Oh, for sure.
All right. Next one. That was fantastic, by the way. Next one. If you had the opportunity to say one thing to all of the non-Christians in America, what would you say?
To all my non-Christians out there, I would really invite them to consider this, that either Jesus is who he says he is, or he's not. He's either the Savior of the world that came to die for your sins, and he's alive today to give you life, or he's not. He's either God or he's not. And if he's not, then we're all just going to die, and then it's just going to be like we're ceased to exist, and like, okay, well, that sucked, but whatever. But if he is who he says he is, then there's a lot more at stake here than just like these short years that we live here on earth. Like there's eternity on the line here. And there's so much evidence for Jesus' life, death, and resurrection that really back up what he has to say about himself, that I'm like, have you considered the evidence? And if you haven't, then why not? What's stopping you?
We appreciate your time. What time is it out there in California?
5.
It's midnight here.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
No, but what's the temperature outside there?
Oh, that's a good question. It was actually cloudy today, so it was like 70-ish.
That's how you know she don't live in Western PA. She said today was actually cloudy. It's always cloudy here.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it's always sunny.
Yeah, it was. I think what was the high today? 61 here, and that was a warm week.
I'm in a hoodie.
We haven't seen the sun in like 10 years. We've heard the elders talk about the big ball of fire in the sky, but we haven't seen it yet.
So sad. You guys need to come out to California.
Yeah. Jen, thank you so much for being on our podcast. We really appreciate it. And I know that we learned a lot. I know the audience is going to learn a lot. When we drop this, we'll send it to you, and you can put it out there for all your friends and family to see. And we will talk about doing maybe a follow-up with you, and then maybe even your dad. That'd be great. Okay.
Yeah, no, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you guys so much. And this has been really great. So I really appreciate you guys having me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Next time I talk to you, I want to hear the follow-up if you looked into those texts.
Yeah, all right, I will. I got to do my homework.
Check out Apologia Church. They're in Arizona.
Oh, okay.
Apologia Church.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I'm going to close this off. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this is Anthony Clauditis here at Faith Presbyterian Church. We are so glad you joined us today for our Engage podcast. I trust you've been blessed by Jen, and you learn more about apologetics. We look forward to connecting with you in the future. So stay blessed. And if you have been touched by this podcast, leave a comment, and we'll talk to you later.
Peace.